I, Layla, 34, female, still remember the exact moment when those words left David's 35-year-old lips. Not tonight or any night. The finality in his voice made my body go cold. We had been married for 6 years, and yeah, things hadn't been perfect lately, but I never expected something so final about our intimate life. Some background about me. I'm a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company in the Midwest. Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills, and I've been steadily climbing the ladder. Been there about 8 years now. I met David in college during our junior year. He was studying psychology. I was in business. We clicked right away. Both of us were ambitious, but down to earth. We dated for 3 years before getting married in a modest ceremony with about 80 guests, mostly family and close friends. David worked as an HR consultant and made decent money. We bought a 3-bedroom house in a nice suburb about 4 years ago. No kids yet. We were both focused on our careers first. I always thought we had a good thing going. We both contributed to the household, took vacations twice a year, usually one beach trip and one visiting family. We had a decent social circle of other couples our age. Pretty normal life, nothing extraordinary, but stable and comfortable. At least that's what I thought. That evening started like any other normal day. I came home from work tired after a 10-hour day dealing with clients and a presentation that didn't go as well as I hoped. I was looking forward to seeing David, maybe ordering some takeout, watching a movie, the usual stuff couples do. The moment I walked in, I could tell something was off. He was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone with this weird intensity. We had dinner while talking about boring stuff. His coworkers' drama, my project deadline, the usual crap. Then we moved to the living room where he continued scrolling through his phone, probably on one of those Reddit forums he'd been obsessed with lately, while I watched some random show on TV. When I leaned over to kiss his neck, something that used to make him smile, he pulled away sharp like I'd tried to stab him or something. "Don't," he said, not even looking up from his screen. "I'm not in the mood." "You haven't been in the mood for weeks now," I replied, trying hard not to sound frustrated, even though I totally was. "Is everything okay?" That's when he put down his phone, looked me straight in the eyes, with this cold expression I'd never seen before, and delivered those crushing words, "Not tonight or any night. I'm done with that part of our relationship." My mind raced through a million possible responses, but I just sat there like an idiot, my mouth probably hanging open. How do you even reply to someone suddenly ending physical intimacy in a marriage? No explanation, no room for discussion, just a one-sided decision that affected us both. "What exactly do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, hoping I misunderstood. "Exactly what I said," he continued, his voice weirdly calm, like he was explaining something to a child. "I'm comfortable with our life together, the house, our social circle, the stability. But I'm no longer interested in physical intimacy with you or with any woman. I've been reading a lot about how relationships don't have to include that, and I've decided I'm not participating in that expectation anymore. You can accept it or not, that's your choice." Holy. He'd been getting deeper into some of those online forums recently, but I never thought it would affect our relationship. I was completely blindsided. "So you're just unilaterally deciding that our marriage doesn't include physical intimacy anymore without any discussion?" I asked, trying to understand. "I don't need your permission to set boundaries with my own body," he replied, his tone getting that edge I'd come to recognize whenever he was quoting something from his online groups. "The fact that you think this requires a discussion just shows how entitled women are to men's bodies." I sat back completely stunned. "David, this isn't about entitlement. This is about our relationship, about connection and intimacy between partners who supposedly love each other. Love doesn't mean I have to perform physical acts I no longer want to participate in," he countered. "When did this change? When did you stop wanting to be with me that way?" I asked, genuinely confused. Just 2 months ago, things had seemed normal. He shrugged. "It's been building for a while. I've just finally found the courage to vocalize it instead of performing for your benefit." That night, I slept on the couch, not because he asked me to, but because I couldn't bear to lie next to someone who had just shattered my understanding of our entire relationship. The next few days were weird as hell. We continued living together, eating together, even watching TV together, all while this invisible wall had been built between us. He acted like his declaration was as ordinary as announcing he wanted to change grocery stores or something, not the complete reshaping of our marriage. I tried bringing up counseling over breakfast 3 days after his announcement. I found a couples therapist with good reviews. I think we should talk to someone about what's going on between us. We don't need therapy, he responded dismissively while rolling his eyes. There's nothing wrong with me, and I'm not going to be pressured into physical intimacy I don't want just because society expects it. Maybe you should get therapy for your dependency on male validation. Jesus Christ. Of course, he was right about not being pressured. I would never do that. But his complete unwillingness to even talk about this sudden change left me feeling like I was living with a stranger wearing my husband's face. Everything I said was twisted to make me sound like some kind of manipulator. At night, laying on my side of our now purely functional bed, I'd moved back from the couch, determined not to be displaced in my own home. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how I missed the gradual breakdown of our connection. Had I been so absorbed in work that I failed to notice him pulling away? Or had he hidden his feelings until reaching some breaking point I never saw coming? I reviewed our recent history, looking for signs. Sure, our sex life had slowed down somewhat over the past year, but that seemed normal for a couple married 6+ years, both working demanding jobs. We still had date nights, still held hands during movies, still told each other, "I love you," before bed. Or at least we had until recently. One thing became real clear, real fast. I was now in a marriage where I was neither wanted nor needed in any meaningful way. I was simply convenient. A contributor to bills, a social partner for couple-oriented gatherings, a housemate who helped maintain our outward image of marital success. Just another person he could point to when talking to his new friends about how he was setting boundaries. I tried one more time to understand, catching him on a Saturday morning when we were both home. "David, I'm trying to respect your feelings, but I need to understand better what's happening. Did I do something wrong? Is there something I can change?" He sighed dramatically, like my question was the most exhausting thing he'd ever heard. "This is exactly the problem with women. You think everything is about you. This is about my journey and my autonomy. The fact that you're making it about what you did wrong just proves my point." "But we're married," I said, frustration building. "Your decisions affect me too." "So what? You think your entitlement to my body outweighs my right to control it? This is why relationships fail, because people like you can't handle others making their own choices." I walked away from that conversation feeling completely hopeless. There was no reasoning with him, no finding common ground. He had created a narrative where any disagreement with his position just confirmed his worldview. 2 weeks after his declaration, I found myself sitting in my car outside our house, unable to summon the energy to go inside. What was waiting for me there? Another evening of polite coexistence with someone who had unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without any real explanation. Another lecture about how I was part of the problem for expecting basic human connection in a marriage. That's when I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue living in this emotional desert, hoping for rain that would never come, or I could redirect my time, attention, and resources towards something or someone that offered at least the possibility of growth. As I finally walked through our front door, a plan was forming in my mind. Not revenge or some dramatic confrontation, at least not yet, but something more powerful, a complete redirection of my life's energy. If he had moved on from me without physically leaving, maybe I could do the same. My redirection began with small changes. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., a full hour before David would wake up. Those quiet morning hours quickly became sacred to me. Time that was completely my own, free from his judgmental stare and passive-aggressive comments. I started with 20 minutes of meditation, something I'd always dismissed as impractical with my busy schedule. To my surprise, that brief period of morning stillness helped clear my mind of the constant thoughts about my failing marriage. Next came physical exercise. Nothing dramatic at first, just basic push-ups, sit-ups, and a short run around the neighborhood. By the time he emerged from our bedroom, I had already showered, dressed, and started my day with purpose. "You're up early," he commented on the third day, finding me sipping coffee and reading at the kitchen table. The slight annoyance in his voice was obvious. He was used to me being half asleep while he dominated the morning space. "Just making some changes," I replied casually, not offering any further explanation. He didn't ask for one, just made some comment under his breath about toxic positivity and workout culture that I pretended not to hear. The second week, I joined a gym near my office. Instead of rushing home after work to an increasingly uncomfortable environment, I spent an hour working out. The physical exertion became a form of therapy. Each rep pushed out another fragment of resentment and self-pity. I started fantasizing about the future, one where David wasn't the center of my universe. I also reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Women David had always disliked for being too dramatic or bad influences. Nothing dramatic, just casual lunches and after-work coffees. I was careful not to mention my marital situation. These meetings weren't about seeking sympathy or bad-mouthing my husband. They were about rebuilding connections that had nothing to do with my identity as David's wife. What was really interesting was realizing how many of my girlfriends were going through something similar. Not identical, but the same pattern. Partners who had gradually transformed into critical strangers, constantly finding fault with normal behavior while still expecting financial stability and emotional support. My friend Rachel, 36, was dealing with a boyfriend who suddenly declared her love of books a waste of time and demanded she spend evenings watching political debates instead. My college roommate Allison, 35, couldn't post anything on social media without her husband jumping in to correct her thinking. "It's like they want us to be both cheerleaders and punching bags," Rachel sighed over lunch one day. "You can't win." That phrase stuck with me. You can't win. Not if you keep playing by constantly changing rules you had no say in creating. So maybe the answer was to stop playing altogether and create my own game. I started setting aside money in a separate account David couldn't access. Nothing dramatic that would affect our household contributions, just redirecting my discretionary spending and slowly building a safety net. If nothing else, it gave me a sense of control in a situation where I felt increasingly powerless. 1 month into my redirection, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The daily workouts had started reshaping my body, shoulders stronger, waist slimmer. My posture had improved, and the constant tension that had knotted my neck and shoulders for months had eased. But the most significant change was in my eyes. They looked focused, alive in a way they hadn't been since his declaration. I updated my wardrobe next. Nothing flashy or desperate, just well-fitted clothes that suited my improving physique and projected confidence. When I wore a new blouse to dinner with friends, several people commented on how good I looked. "You've lost weight, haven't you?" our friend Melissa asked during a dinner party. "Just been taking better care of myself," I replied with a smile. David noticed too, though he tried to disguise his interest with criticism. "Isn't that top a little tight?" he asked one morning as I was getting ready for work. "Seems like you're trying way too hard." Very midlife crisis energy. I just smiled and left without responding, which seemed to annoy him even more. The redirection extended to my finances as well. We always maintained separate accounts alongside our joint one for household expenses. I continued contributing my share to our joint obligations, but redirected my discretionary spending. The expensive trip to a wellness retreat in Costa Rica that David had been hinting about for our anniversary, that money went instead into a high-yield investment account under only my name. I also invested in a photography workshop, a passion I had abandoned years ago after David complained about the time it took away from us. Ironic now, considering his stance. Photography got me outdoors on weekends, hiking to capture landscapes at dawn when the light was perfect. These solo excursions became another form of meditation. Behind the camera, framing each shot, I found a state of flow that allowed me to forget everything else. I invested in decent equipment, nothing outrageous, but a good DSLR camera and a couple of quality lenses. My first few attempts were pretty amateur, but I watched tutorials online and practiced constantly. Soon, I was capturing images I was genuinely proud of. Mountain landscapes bathed in early morning light, close-ups of frost patterns on fallen leaves, dramatic storm clouds gathering over fields. I started posting my work online, connecting with other photographers, and building a small following that appreciated my eye for composition. Some of my photos even started selling as prints through an online marketplace, creating a small but growing side income that went straight into my separate account. "Where have you been going so early on Saturdays?" David asked, after several weeks of my new routine. The entitlement in his voice was crystal clear. He was used to me being available whenever he wanted. "Taking photographs," I answered simply. "Since when are you into photography?" The accusatory tone made it sound like I needed his permission to have hobbies. "I've always been into it. I just haven't had the time to pursue it until now." His expression suggested he wanted to ask more but couldn't quite figure out how. Or perhaps he didn't want to show too much interest in my life after having so deliberately stepped back from it. "Well, I needed help with some things around the house last weekend, but you were nowhere to be found," he complained. Typical. No interest in my activities, just how they inconvenienced him. You could have texted, I replied calmly. Phone works even in the mountains. I shouldn't have to text my own wife to get basic help, he snapped. I just shrugged. Things change. Those two words hung in the air between us, and I saw something flicker across his face. The first hint that he was beginning to realize his declaration might have consequences he hadn't anticipated. At work, my renewed focus paid off big time. I approached projects with clarity and confidence that hadn't been there during the months of marital distress. My boss, Rob, 45, noticed the change. Whatever you're doing, keep it up, he said, after I successfully landed a major client that had been on the fence for months. You're on fire lately. The compliment meant more than it should have. After months of feeling unwanted at home, professional recognition filled some of the void. Not completely, but enough to keep moving forward. I volunteered for projects that required travel, something I'd avoided in the past, to spend more time with David. A 3-day conference in Chicago, a week-long training in Denver, a client meeting in Boston. Each trip was a breath of fresh air. Hotel rooms where I could spread out without judgment. Meals where no one made snide comments about my choices. Conversations with people who didn't view every interaction through an ideological lens. During my Denver trip, I met up with an old college friend, Sarah, who had moved there years ago. We hiked in the mountains, and I took some of my best photos yet. When I posted them online, my follower count jumped significantly, and I sold 3 prints within a week. You know, you could actually turn this into a serious side business, Sarah said, as we rested at a scenic overlook. Your eye for composition is really good. Her casual encouragement planted a seed in my mind. What if photography wasn't just an escape? What if it could be something more substantial, a potential path to a different future? 3 months into my redirection, I was sleeping better, looking better, and performing better in nearly every aspect of my life, except my marriage, which remained this empty shell of formal interactions and parallel existences. The irony wasn't lost on me. In withdrawing his affection, David had inadvertently pushed me toward becoming a stronger version of myself. It was like the universe's strange way of compensating. What David didn't know was that I'd opened a separate checking account and started routing 50% of my paychecks there, including my performance bonuses. The other 50% was more than enough to cover my share of our joint expenses. I was building my escape fund, dollar by dollar. Not that I was planning to leave just yet. I wanted to see how this played out first. One evening, as I prepared to leave for a photography meetup, he asked an unexpected question. Are you seeing someone else? The entitlement in his voice was unbelievable. He could end our physical relationship unilaterally, but still expected exclusive access to my time and attention. I paused by the door, camera bag over my shoulder. No, I answered truthfully. Why would you ask that? You've changed, he said, his voice carrying a note I couldn't identify. You're hardly ever home anymore. The hypocrisy of his concern almost made me laugh. I'm just redirecting my time and energy into things that fulfill me, I replied, using his own clinical approach. Isn't that what you've been doing? That's different, he responded, clearly irritated that I'd used his own logic against him. I made a personal choice about my body and autonomy, he continued. And I'm making personal choices about my time and interests, I countered. Seems perfectly fair to me. So you're what? Punishing me? His voice rose slightly. Not at all, I replied calmly. I'm adapting to our new reality. You set a boundary, and I respect that. I'm simply setting boundaries of my own. He had no response to that, and I left without waiting for one. As I drove to meet my photography friends, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since his declaration, I wasn't desperately hoping for him to change his mind. I was too busy creating a life that no longer centered around his approval or affection. At the meetup, I showed my recent shots to the group. Among them was a man named Martin, tall, easygoing, with a camera slung casually over his shoulder. He worked as a freelance photojournalist, contributing to magazines and travel sites. These are really good, he said, looking through some of my shots. You've got a natural eye for light and framing. Ever thought about doing this professionally? His words struck me harder than I expected. David's criticism had become such a constant soundtrack that genuine encouragement felt almost foreign. I smiled, a little self-conscious. I've sold a few prints online, but it's mostly just a hobby. Well, if you ever want feedback or guidance, I'd be happy to help, Martin offered. His tone wasn't pushy, just kind, supportive. I thanked him, tucking the offer away in my mind. By the time I got home that night, David was already in bed, probably annoyed I hadn't been there to listen to his latest complaints about coworkers. I didn't care. I had bigger things on my mind. The pivotal moment came during a company retreat 6 months into my redirection. My team had gathered at a lakeside resort for a weekend of strategic planning and team building. After a productive day of meetings, we relaxed around a fire pit, sharing stories and snacks under the stars. My colleague Emma, 29, who had joined the marketing department 3 months earlier, sat down beside me. Emma was warm, supportive, and actually interested in other people's lives. You know, when I first started, everyone told me how lucky I was to be working with you, she said softly. Really? Why's that? I asked, genuinely curious. They said you'd completely transformed the department's performance, but they also mentioned how much you've changed personally over the past few months. They said you used to be withdrawn, almost sad. That doesn't match the person I've known. I stared into the flames, considering how to respond. Let's just say I went through some personal challenges and decided to focus on what I could control rather than what I couldn't. She nodded thoughtfully. Well, whatever you did worked. You seem completely in your element now. Her words made me pause. Maybe I really was changing in ways that others could see. When I showed her some of my recent photographs on my phone, she gasped. These are amazing. You have a real talent. Have you considered showing these professionally? Actually, I've sold some prints online, and a magazine might feature a few, I replied, surprised at how good it felt to share this part of my life with someone who genuinely seemed to care. That's fantastic, she said, smiling in a way that felt unguarded, genuine. The warmth of her presence reminded me of something simple. I deserved to be around people who saw me, not people who dismissed me. Later, as the group dispersed to their cabins, Emma walked alongside me on the path. Some of us are planning a sunrise hike tomorrow before the meetings start. You should join. Perfect lighting for those landscape shots you love. I agreed. The next morning, standing at the top of a ridge with Emma and 2 other colleagues, I watched the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. I took dozens of photographs, but found my lens repeatedly drawn to the horizon, new beginnings, endless possibilities. When I returned home Sunday evening, David was in the kitchen, unusually attentive. How was the retreat? He asked. Productive, I said simply, setting down my bag. I saw some of the photos you posted. Beautiful location. That man in some of the pictures, he's in your photography group, isn't he? The question caught me off guard. He must have noticed Martin in the background of a few shots. That's Martin, I answered neutrally. He's a photographer too. He seems very interested in you, David said, his eyes narrowing. The territorial behavior was rich, coming from someone who had explicitly rejected me. I hadn't really noticed, I lied, keeping my voice even. Really? You've taken about a dozen photos with him in them. Seems like you noticed plenty. I chose my next words carefully. He happened to be in the frame during our group activities. Why are you asking about this? You made it very clear that certain aspects of our relationship are over. You don't get to dictate who I spend time with professionally. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing more. That was the moment I decided to accelerate my exit plan. The following week brought more surprises. David started initiating conversations, asking about my day, even suggesting we watch shows together. He made dinner several times and toned down the lectures. It was like living with the man I'd married years ago, before he had transformed into a stranger. But I knew exactly what was happening. He was trying to reestablish control, to pull me back into orbit now that he sensed I was drifting away. The realization only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. 2 key events aligned to create the perfect opportunity for my freedom. First, I received a significant promotion at work with a substantial raise and more travel opportunities. I kept this information to myself, not sharing it with David despite his increasingly desperate attempts to re-engage. Second, through my professional network, I learned that his company was planning major layoffs due to a merger. His department was likely to be hit hard. This wasn't inside trading or anything illegal, just the kind of information that flows through business connections in our mid-sized city. The timing couldn't have been better. Over the past months, through my networking and new social connections, I'd learned that his company was planning these layoffs. In fact, I'd helped a colleague's spouse get hired at a competing firm 3 weeks earlier, knowing they'd need someone with David's exact qualifications. I could have easily done the same for him. A single phone call would have secured him an interview at minimum, but I chose not to. Instead, I accelerated my exit strategy. I consulted with a lawyer discreetly, paying in cash from my separate account. I learned exactly what I needed to do to protect myself financially in a divorce. I documented David's declaration about ending physical intimacy, his subsequent behavior, everything that might help my case. I also discovered through casual conversations that David had been bad-mouthing me to his friends and family, painting himself as some kind of victim, while conveniently omitting his unilateral decision to fundamentally change our marriage. That sealed the deal. My escape needed to be complete and decisive. 2 weeks later, David's company announced the layoffs. He came home visibly shaken. "My department might be cut next month," he said, clearly expecting sympathy. "I'm really worried." "That's tough," I responded, offering basic courtesy, but nothing more. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." The layoffs happened faster than expected. The following Friday, David came home in tears. "I lost my job," he sobbed. "They eliminated our entire department." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, maintaining a neutral expression. "What's your plan?" He looked shocked at my response. "My plan? I just lost my job. I need time to process this." "Of course," I replied. "Take all the time you need, but our financial obligations don't stop. So just let me know how you plan to continue contributing to the household expenses." His jaw literally dropped. "Are you serious right now? I'm in crisis and you're asking about bills?" I shrugged. "Just being practical. We both contribute equally, right? That's always been your position." The next morning, I made my move. While David was in the shower, I transferred every penny from our joint account into my private account, leaving just enough to avoid overdraft fees. Then I packed a bag with essentials and my most important possessions. When he emerged from the bathroom, I was waiting in the living room with divorce papers. "What's this?" he asked, eyeing the documents. "Divorce papers," I replied calmly. "I have realized I deserve better than a one-sided marriage with someone who unilaterally changed the terms of our relationship without discussion or compromise." His face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief. "You can't be serious. Because I wouldn't sleep with you? That's what this is about?" "No, it's about respect and reciprocity. You made a choice that affected us both, presented it as non-negotiable, and expected me to simply accept it. That's not a partnership." He scoffed. "So, you're running off with your little photographer friend? How predictable." "This has nothing to do with Martin or anyone else. This is about you and me, and the broken agreement between us. By the way, I've moved our joint funds into a separate account that you won't have access to until we reach a settlement." His face paled. "You did what? You can't do that. I just lost my job. How am I supposed to pay for anything?" "Not my problem," I replied, echoing the same dismissive tone he'd used when ending our physical relationship. "You should have considered the potential consequences before making unilateral decisions about our marriage." "This is financial abuse," he shouted, tears forming in his eyes. "I need that money for basic necessities." "No," I said firmly. "This is consequences. And speaking of necessities, the mortgage is due next week. I've calculated your half. It's listed in the documents. I'll expect your payment on time." He started to panic visibly. "Please, you can't do this. I have no income right now. I need time to find a new job." "You should have thought about that before declaring not tonight or any night and treating me like an accessory to your life rather than a partner. You wanted independence. Congratulations. You've got it. Complete financial independence, too." Over the next week, David's behavior changed dramatically. The cold rhetoric disappeared, replaced by desperate pleas and attempts to renegotiate. He suggested counseling, hinted at reconsidering his stance on intimacy, even tried seduction one night, which I firmly rejected. My lawyer had advised me not to leave the house yet, so we continued living together in increasingly tense circumstances. David's friends started calling me, telling me how cruel I was being, how I needed to support my husband in his time of need. I blocked their numbers one by one. His parents reached out next, suggesting we all meet to discuss the situation. I declined politely, but firmly. "Your son made his choice months ago," I told his father over the phone. "I'm simply making mine now." 2 weeks into this standoff, David's desperation peaked. He had no job prospects, no access to our joint savings, and bills piling up. He approached me one evening, completely defeated. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "I need help. I can't do this alone." "That's an interesting perspective," I replied coolly. "Wasn't it you who told me that marriage was just a social construct? That physical intimacy with me was something you could unilaterally end without discussion?" "I was wrong," he whispered. I got caught up in all these ideas without thinking about what they really meant. Please, I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, rebuild our relationship, whatever you want. The problem is, David, I don't want that anymore. You showed me who you really are, someone who views relationships as transactional, who takes what he wants and discards the rest. Now that you need something from me, suddenly you're willing to reconsider everything. That's not love or partnership, that's opportunism. I stood up, gathering my keys. I'm moving out tomorrow. The divorce papers are ready for your signature. If you contest them, I'm prepared for a legal battle that will drain what little resources you have left. If you sign them as is, I'll provide a one-time payment to help you transition to your new independent life. You planned this all along, he realized, his voice hollow. From the moment I said those words, you were planning your exit. No, I corrected him. I planned this from the moment I realized you saw me as disposable. You taught me an important lesson about self-worth, David, and for that, I suppose I should thank you. I moved out the next day into a new apartment I'd secretly secured weeks earlier. David signed the divorce papers without contest, receiving his settlement payment as promised. I heard through mutual friends that he moved back in with his parents in another state. As for me, I continued building my new life, advancing in my career, developing my photography business on the side, maintaining my physical fitness, and yes, eventually deepening my friendship with Martin. At first, we were simply companions on hikes and photography trips, but slowly, as weeks turned into months, our connection grew undeniable. He was patient, never pushing me, never treating my attention as an entitlement. With Martin, respect wasn't a bargaining chip, it was the foundation. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, my first photography exhibition opened at a local gallery. Among the images on display was a striking landscape taken at dawn on a mountain trail. The morning I realized I deserved better. Martin stood beside me that night, his hand warm in mine, pride shining in his eyes. "You've built something incredible, Layla," he whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The greatest revenge wasn't taking David's financial security or even his dignity. It was becoming the woman I should have been all along, confident, self-sufficient, and unwilling to accept anything less than a genuine, reciprocal relationship. In trying to diminish me, David had inadvertently set me free. Sometimes he still tried to contact me, especially when he was struggling financially. I maintained minimal, business-like communication as needed to finalize any remaining legal matters, but otherwise I'd moved on completely. Our mutual friends eventually learned the full story, and most understood my position, even if they felt I'd been harsh in my execution. But here's the thing about consequences. They're not harsh or kind. They're just inevitable. David chose to destroy the foundation of our marriage while expecting the structure to remain standing. When it collapsed, he was simply experiencing the natural outcome of his own actions. This experience taught me that self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential, and that sometimes the most powerful response to someone who treats you as disposable is to simply agree with them and walk away. Not in anger or bitterness, but with the calm certainty that you deserve more than they're willing to give. So if you're reading this and recognizing your own relationship in my story, know that you have choices. You don't have to accept unilateral changes to your marriage. You don't have to diminish yourself to accommodate someone else's ideology. And most importantly, you don't have to wait for permission to start building a life that fulfills you. The person who tries to change the rules without your input is telling you exactly how much they value your voice in the relationship. Listen to what they're really saying, not just with their words, but with their actions.